Before me is a study composed by Welsh chess player David Blundell in 1995. I know, funny name for a chess player. And it's at this moment that I would normally tell you to pause the video and try to figure out the position. If you want to do that, then feel free. But I'd recommend that you set up either a virtual board or a physical board to play around in the position because it's incredibly deep. So if you just got back from pausing the video, then welcome back. But for everyone else who just wants to enjoy this beautiful study, I will now walk you through it. Starting with the move King to C1, this is the most natural move. And I think this is the move that most of you would be drawn to. You're just bringing the king closer to the position, and you want to put the king in front of the pawn, and then eventually you'll use your knight to capture the other pawn, and this should be an easy win. But unfortunately for you, black is not going to go quietly. They're going to try the move king g4. And the point of king g4 is now they want to play f3, and they're going to use their king to assist the pawn down the board, and then eventually make a queen that will either have to trade for our knight, and then go to a drawn king and pawn endgame with just these two pawns, or maybe black will even end up winning some cases if we're unable to stop the pawn. This still doesn't look like a big problem, however, because we can just continue with the move king d2. And once they push the pawn, it looks like, yeah, king goes to e3, and this is perfectly fine. But it's not perfectly fine, because black has this saving grace here, pawn to f2, which is a very nice move already. Deflecting the king away from this e-pawn here, like this, from which black will just play king f4, and then they will collect the pawn in the center with a drawn position because the knight is unable to go anywhere, which will protect our pawn. And a knight versus a lone king is just a drawn position. So instead of that, white doesn't play king to e3 and will instead try this move knight to e3. And this is quite an interesting one, because after the king goes up to f4, we can play this move king to d3. And now our king is protecting the pawn and the knight is stopping the queening square, so this looks pretty good. But black has another trick up their sleeve, and it's pawn to f2. And after the knight goes back to block on f1, like this, then black just plays king to f3. And white continues with knight to d2, trying to force the king away from the pawn and allow us to collect the black pawn. The black king steps up to f4. Now keep an eye on this position because this is a critical position for pretty much all of the lines that I'm going to show you in the future. And the point here is that this is actually a mutual zugzwang. If it were black to move in this position, then black would be forced away from pressuring the pawn, and because we have a little barrier here with the knight going here as well, black would have to go to one of these three squares or give us their pawn. And if black moves away to any of these three squares, then we can just start invading with our own king, and eventually we'll win the black pawn with something like king to e3 most likely. But because the position is white to move, black will have to continue moving back and forth with the knight like this, and because the knight is unable to lose a tempo, which means it's unable to reverse a zugzwang, because the knight will always move back to its original square on an even numbered move. I'll explain this in simple terms. If the knight ever wants to move away somewhere and return to the e3 square while the king moves back and forth, then the king will always return to e7 at the same time as the knight returns to e3. So I'll demonstrate like this. The knight moves away, the king moves here, the knight moves back, the king moves here. Let's make it a little bit more complicated, because it seems intuitive that if the knight runs around somewhere random and finds another path to e3, then the king surely doesn't end up on e7 again. Well, that's not the case. So we move the knight here, king goes here, knight goes here, king goes back, knight here, king here, knight to e3, and once again king e7. So you can see these pieces will always end up on the same square. But this is not the case with a lot of other pieces, like the bishop here, for example. So if white now goes over to b3, then black is able to lose a tempo with the bishop. So watch this. Black moves here, white moves here, black moves here, white moves here, and black moves here. Now it's an odd number of moves after white moves back, and you'll notice now that the position is black to move, when previously the position was white to move. So black was able to lose a tempo and reverse the zugzwang position, making a position that was white to move into a position where it is now black to move. So now we understand the predicament and can see why white can't just move the knight around with the hopes of reversing the zugzwang. What white can try, however, is this interesting move king to e2, and this seems very good for white, because if black tries to hang on to their pawn like this, then we go king to f1. And after black steps up, because they have to, there's no way for black to continue protecting their pawn. We just capture the pawn, and this is an easy win for white. The black king will be boxed out somewhere, and eventually we will go and collect this black pawn without much trouble. But luckily for black, they have this stunning move where they can just promote to a queen, and this is a double deflection here. Either the knight has to move away, or the king has to move away. If the knight captures it, then you just immediately give up the pawn like this, and then this is a draw. And if the king captures it, then there's this move king to e3. And this time it's the black king that is preventing the white king from getting into the game and also putting sufficient pressure on the knight, which is the only piece guarding the pawn. White must move over to protect the knight, but now black plays king d3, keeping the pressure up on the knight. The king has to go to d1, otherwise it will relinquish control of the knight and maybe even risk losing, so white moves the king to the side. But now black moves back this way. They don't move the king to c3 because that would allow king to e2 and then white is winning, but they keep up the pressure with the king on e3, continuing to harass the knight. And when the king eventually steps up to c2 trying to make progress here, then king d4. The only move, but it maintains control of all of the critical squares and white cannot make progress forward. They simply can't move forward here. If they move the knight anywhere, they drop the pawn, and if they try and move the king back, then once again, black just moves forward. So white's only real try is to go around the side, but now comes king d3, walling out the king like this. If white gets ambitious here, then they actually end up losing the game in a very, very nasty way, like this. So white has nothing better here but to settle for the draw after just playing their knight back to b1, moving the knight somewhere away from the pawn, otherwise they'll lose the game, like this. And the king takes the pawn, and now white has to come back and defend, sacrificing the knight for the last pawn. And for this reason, the natural move king c1 is ineffective. But I promise you, we're just getting started, because things are only going to get more crazy from here. Because white tries the extremely creative move knight to a3. The point here is that white wants to be able to put their knight on c4 and potentially pressure this pawn like this, and also bring their king into the game via c2. Black, of course, tries f3 to push their pawn forward and try to make this a queen, and we go knight c4, now pressuring the pawn like this. And if black tries this very, very natural move king g4, it's actually a huge blunder, because we have king c2, and after king g3, we don't play any other move like king d3, because after king d3, we go f2, and what you'll notice about this position is that it's actually a direct transposition into that original line where we reach this drawn position like this. A mutual zugzwang's occurred once again, and king e2 is met with promotion. Instead, what we do is we grab the distant opposition with king c3. This is truly beautiful. Odd number of squares between the kings here, and when the king ends up stepping back, then we're able to go king d3. And this is a winning position, because now, when you go f2, knight d2 comes, and it's black to move. So flipping back over to the drawn position, you can see where this one is now white to move, but now we have black to move, and this position is a win, because the king can go over to e2, and when they try and hold onto the pawn like this, it's hopeless, because we can just play knight f1, force the king away, and then eat the pawn. But black hasn't given up on their bag of tricks just yet. Oh no, sir. Instead of playing the move king to f4 or pushing the pawn, black tries this genius little move king to g4. And this is very interesting because now if we go king d3, then once again f2, same exact position occurs here, and this position is a draw because it is white to move. But instead of playing king d3, because of the very suspicious placement of the black king and the pawn, we're able to deliver this fork. Knight takes on e5 with a check. Very important this was a check, because otherwise that pawn would run away to victory. And after the king steps to f4, we don't just take the pawn and hope that the king will capture our knight so that we can run our pawn to victory. Instead, we have the saving grace here, king to e5, protecting the pawn and the knight, such that after they try and push their pawn to victory, we have knight d3, another fork now on the king and the pawn. The king steps here, and now we capture the pawn. The king is forced to take the knight, but the pawn really does run to victory this time, and there is absolutely no way to stop it. But if you thought black was just toast after knight a3, then good attempt, but I'm afraid you are sorely mistaken. That's because after f3 and knight c4, black actually has this incredible drawing move, king to h4. Very, very counterintuitive. You don't go towards the pawn like this to try and help it across and get closer to white's pawn, but instead you play this move so that you can enter the zugzwang position once again and you can waste a tempo. So now when the king steps up to c2, you can play king to g4. And what you'll notice about this position is that now black has lost the tempo, which means that when white plays king to d3, black goes f2, and on king to e2, then we're just stepping over to the side and attacking the pawn. Because once again, after knight goes to d2, you'll notice this transposition, we promote to a queen here, and then the game is once again a draw in the exact same way as before. And if white goes for the other attempt with knight to e3, then once again we get this transposition here after the king goes to f4, the king goes back to e2, the knight goes to f1, and king to f3, knight d2 check, king f4, and we have the same exact mutual zugzwang. So this incredible king to h4 move makes it so that white's responses don't quite work. Although white's not out of tricks in this variation yet. They can also try king c2, and when the king steps closer, they can go for king c3. This is quite a creative little move because it baits out the move king to f4, where king to d3 is now a win, because when the pawn goes here, knight goes to d2, we enter the zugzwang position, except now black is the one that has to move, and black will end up losing the game after the king moves here, knight goes to f1, we collect the pawn, and is pretty trivial. But indeed, black does not fall for that. Instead, they go king to g3, simply escorting their pawn down the board, and when the king goes to d3, pawn pushes, knight goes to d2, they have nothing better but to end up transposing back into the original position with king to f4, knight f1, king f3, knight d2, and once again we get this weird drawing construction, which is probably starting to look more and more like a strange dream than any chess position. The last thing that white can go for is this very enterprising little move, king to d2. And it has a very similar idea to king to c3, which is that when the king steps here, now you can access d3 square. But unfortunately, it fails to pawn to f2, and we end up with a very, very similar line after the king steps over. The king steps over, attacking our pawn like this. We go knight d2, protecting it. And this is all looking very, very familiar again. They give up the queen and play king e3, getting the same exact drawn position, just like this. So if you're able to start putting the pieces together at this point, you may realize that the problem is that once the king steps up to g3 and their king goes here, we actually want to play king to c4, but the knight is in the way. If we could play king c4 here and they push, we'd be able to play knight to d2 and then stop them from promoting, whilst also going after to protect our pawn and capture theirs as well. Which is why, amazingly, the winning idea is not to go for the c4 square, but to go for the b3 square with knight to a1. Incredible. A knight move to the corner of the board, the absolute worst possible square that the knight could go, is the only winning solution. The idea is that when they push their pawn forward, we go knight to b3, king steps up, we go king up, they go here, and then we go king c3. The only move. We can't go to d2 because then we have no attack on their pawn. But when we go to c3, if they try and continue stalling us out and bait us into playing our king over to d3 with something like king to g4, then we don't play king to d3. That would go into the draw line that we've discussed many, many times. But instead, we go king c4. Beautiful distant opposition right here. And if they decide to step forward now, then king d3. And we enter the winning idea from the previous creative knight to a3 move, except this time we can get it by force by playing the move king c4. We'll discuss some other variations after this one. The idea is that when they play f2 now, we bring our knight back and we get the position, except it is white to move and black is forced away from our pawn and we're able to invade the position. So they bring the king like this, we bring the king here, we put the king here, and they can't hold on. If they go back like this, then we can just play king to f1, and they'll have to move away. We capture the pawn, and this is an easily winning position. Additionally, if the king instead tries to hang on to the pawn, then we can just play this move king to f3, allow the promotion, give up the knight, and then we have more than enough time to run the king around like this and collect their pawn with a winning position. I say more than enough time, it's only one tempo. So rewinding the tape all the way back, there's only really one other critical line for us to analyze here, and that is what happens after king to h4. This is the one that got us last time with the knight to a3 line and black was able to make a draw. Well, the critical difference here is that after we go king to c2 and they play king g4, having just wasted the tempo, we can go for king to c3, which doesn't seem all that different to the last line, but the huge difference is that after the king goes to g3, I'm just going to get up the position where we had the knight on c4 so you guys can see the big difference, which is that we cannot go to c4, where we'd have either an attack on the d5 square where we could go after the black pawn, or threaten king to d3, where we then enter the zugzwang position in case black enters king to f4. And if we try something that's too slow, like king to b4, trying to wrap around the position, then it simply doesn't work, because the king goes back up to f4, now attacking this pawn, and when we try and defend it with knight to d2, they can just play pawn to f2, and our king is unable to go to d3 in this position. If our king could go to d3, then this position would be a win for us, because it would be the classic zugzwang position. So you can see we need the king on c4. And of course, we don't have time to get anywhere close to there because black is just going to be queening, capturing, and taking the pawn. However, in this present position, because we can play king c4 and it's the only winning idea after black goes for f2, we just go knight d2 here, Black goes king to f4, attacking our pawn, and well, 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 if it isn't king to d3 entering the very same zugzwang position. I know you might have almost misstepped with king to d5 here, but we only go king d5 if the black king takes to an approach on this side of the board, because otherwise they have king to e3, and on knight to f1, king goes back to f4, protecting the pawn, and we would get another very, very weird zugzwang position where our king must remain protecting this pawn, and no matter which way we move the knight, the black king would walk up to attack it. Very, very weird stuff. But on king to d3, we emerge victorious with the same old zugzwang position, black to move this time, king goes here, king goes here, king goes here, knight f1, king moves over, take it, here, and knight d2. And we secure the winning position. So a very beautiful endgame study there, which I think emphasizes the importance of tempo when it comes to knight endgames in particular. Thank you very much for watching this far, and if you enjoyed my style of teaching, then do check out the description. I offer some one-to-one coaching and you can send me an email. But other than all of that, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye!